Awesome. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Rocking Relationships webinar today. I'm Jon Taylor. I'm a clinical social worker. My practice is just outside of Salt Lake City, Utah. And the bulk of my work is with folks who struggle with addiction, couples who are healing from addiction and infidelity, and the trauma that's interwoven in all of that stuff. So I do this webinar every week because I see a lot of individuals and couples essentially dying on the vine when it comes to their relationships being supported and focusing on relationship issues early on in recovery. I think the old way of thinking is you don't want to overwhelm someone with their relationship when their individual life is so out of control. And while there's some wisdom to that, and there's a point to which that's true, I think a lot of the reason why our individual lives can get out of control is because our relationships can fall into such disrepair. And moving into repair of relationships, or at least not adding to the hurt, is not a hard thing to do. There's some really basic skills that can be practiced at any stage in recovery and any part of the equation. Whether you are someone who struggles with addiction, whether you've been betrayed by your partner's acting out behavior, or whether you love somebody who is on either end of those, or if you just want better relationships in general. So we've been talking about conflict and the different ways that conflict comes up in detours connection in our relationships. So today we're going to talk about repair attempts. Um, and the reason why this becomes a conflict detour is because often over time in relationships, especially if there's a lot of long-standing hurt and built up resentment, repair attempts are missed. And that's extra painful when a repair attempt is missed. So repair attempts are the things that we try to do to move from, I would say, like dangerous conflict or conflict that's going to hurt the relationship back into connection. And so that can happen in a lot of ways, like taking timeouts when we're flooded or we're flooding. That's a really key repair attempt. Using a sense of humor when we're in conflict, that can be a really helpful repair attempt. Listening, even though there's a disagreement, and being able to soothe each other when we're upset. Those are all some common ways that repair attempts enter relationships. So there's two sides to this equation. First of all, a repair attempt actually has to be made. When I start working with couples early on in recovery, a lot of their repair attempts are accidental. And so I'll point it out. Say, do you realize you just did a repair attempt? Or did you catch that? Did you catch what your wife was saying or what your husband was doing? Um, and so that we can kind of stop and see, okay, the momentum is trying to shift, or we're trying to shift the momentum here. And that can bring a lot of confidence. So the attempt has to be made. We also, the repairs have to be accepted if this repair attempt thing is going to work out. You have to choose to change your mind about where your partner is at when they offer a repair attempt. Often what I'll see in couples where there's been like long-standing hurt, long-standing resentment is often the person who has historically been more flexible and more amiable, more willing to make the relationship work. When their partner starts changing into kind of those repair attempts or those all get softer, oftentimes what they're met with is like, so you're going to come to the party now. Now's the time that you're going to choose. You couldn't have done this 20 years ago. And they can be met with this, or they can give this like, I'm not budging anywhere. It's your turn to suffer now. And that's really, really damaging. Even though, the anger that's behind that and the hurt that's behind that, I totally get, and it has a place. Handling the repair attempts and the reaches in that way, I think, is a way to speed more poison into the relationship system rather than to get it out, which is what we're trying to do early on in recovery. So when we make attempts, there can be some reasons why it might be hard for us to respond to repair attempts. And this comes in the workplace as well as romantic relationships. If we have a long-standing resentment or unresolved resentments, we may have a really hard time accepting a repair attempt or making a good repair attempt, because we may feel that if we move to good, then the hurt that I have or the concern that I have didn't matter. It's not going to be addressed. Or we can have a fear around getting closer to somebody. And you know, how many of you out there struggling with sexual addiction and related issues are totally comfortable being completely known by somebody and completely close to somebody? That doesn't happen in sex addiction. So oftentimes when I'm working with couples early on, it's hard to give and receive the repair attempts for the addicted person because closeness is terrifying for them. So those two things, resentment and fears around closeness, if you're having a hard time giving and accepting repair attempts, you're going to want to focus on making some changes there. Otherwise, you're going to be locked in the current distance that you have, and you're going to maintain it in the ways that you do, which can be really hurtful to your relationship. So the time to use repair attempts is when we feel like the conversation or the interaction is going badly, or we fear it might be. So, you know, we don't have to wait to know that damage has actually been done in order for the repair attempt to be effective. You know, for example, I just finished a session with a client who he and his wife had this unexpected charge come through on a phone call with her therapist. And they weren't expecting to pay that much, and they were both kind of upset about it, and they had talked about it, and they said, well, you know, if this is what her time costs, and, you know, they looked at the informed consent and all that, they're like, yeah, she told us ahead of time this would be the charge for this. So they had to call this therapist for directions to the office. And he said, be careful, she might charge you for the call. And it was this little offhanded kind of playful jab. And he got really worried that he had said something hurtful, so he started apologizing. And his spouse said to him, like, "Oh, that was funny. Like, I'm not thinking that's a jab." And she even like played back with something that had an edge to it. But that moment of, let me check that out with you, were you hurt by that? That can be a repair attempt. I'm having problems with my. Okay. Let me try.
That was better. Yeah.
Is that better?
Yes. Okay. I wondered if it was just me, and I was like, I don't think this is just me. So thank you.
I'll try. If this keeps happening, I have an external mic I can hook up if I need to.
This sounds good, but yeah, It was starting to cut out. So thank you.
Okay.
So back up to the story a little.
Yeah. So he had wondered if what he had said was hurtful to her. And so he reached out with a repair attempt, and she wasn't hurt by it, but the repair attempt was seen as a reach in the relationship. Not working.
Yeah, it gets real staticky. So I don't know what's going on, because it was fine, and then all of a sudden it quit. So
let me try my external mic here. You know what it might be? I have a heat dish in my office, and it's pointed at me. So we might be getting interference from the heat on the computer. So let's try this.
You've sat there before, and we've not had issues, so.
Yeah, I'm thinking it might be the heat dish. Let me try this other microphone.
This is how you know they're live or you're watching a recording of it, but this is unscripted. So.
Yes. Let me see. Does recognize the new mic? Not yet.
And your words and movements look, like they're not in sync yet. So.
I'm lagged a little bit.
Yeah, but the sound is good. So I'll take lag over the crackles.
I think the heat was messing with the computer.
Okay.
Is that any better?
Yes.
Okay.
So
okay.
Continue on.
So you can use repair attempts even if there's not an actual hurt. So don't wait until someone expresses, I'm really hurt, and then you try to repair it. You feel like not working?
No, it's crackling again. I'm sorry. I don't know.
Huh. It's not giving me another
You've got it. So next to the microphone with the up, you've got same as system for both the microphone and speaker.
Yeah. The microphone.
You have any headphones handy?
I don't. Let me try this. Give me another option for the mic. Is that any better?
It is for the moment.
Okay. We'll see.
Oh, sorry, everybody, but thank you for hanging with us.
So yeah, when you feel like it's off, make a repair attempt. That can be seen as a reach in the relationship if your partner is receptive. This is something that has to be consciously practiced over and over again as well, because when a relationship gets to a point where we need good repair attempts and we have to recognize them, it means that we haven't had them before. Either the way we're trying to repair is not recognizable to our partner, or we are not repairing in ways that are effective. And so we might have to learn some new ways. For example, I really like the phrase from Brene Brown, the story I'm telling myself is. That can be a really great way to own some very difficult feelings and not have it turn into a criticism of your partner. So the story I'm telling myself is, you don't really care what it is I have to say. Another way is, instead of acting out the feeling, to state the feeling. I'm feeling really defensive right now. I would like to take a time out because I want to hear you out on this. And so I'd like to take a time out and I'd like to come back when I'm not as defensive. Those are all examples of, or those are both examples of some effective repair attempts. There was one thing I was going to ask, but I don't. Anyway, go ahead, Tammy.
No, I was going to say, while you know, because you pointed out that your clients, you'll go, did you notice that? Mm-hmm. You know, and then you're talking about you need to be consciously practicing them. So it feels like, you know, like there could be this time where it's happening, but you may not be as aware of it. So even figuring out how to consciously practice it mm-hmm. can be challenging.
Yeah. And it really, like, if you want to change this dynamic in a relationship, you almost have to sit down together and say, when we get off track, how can we get back on track? Like, give me the code word, give me the signal. When I ask how you're doing, that's me. I really want to know how you're doing. So it really, I think, does take that back and forth and that mapping this out together, because the key with the repair attempts is that we both recognize it's happening. I recognize I'm giving one, and you recognize that one's being given. And if we want to support the relationship, the right choice in that moment when a repair attempt is made, even if it's a sloppy one, we acknowledge it at the very least, and we accept it at the most. You know, so sometimes when we know the attempt is being made and it's really ham-handed, we might say, I can see what you're trying to do, and I appreciate the intention. What you're saying right now is actually making me more angry. What I need from you is, and then we can give some really specific, if you want to land this repair attempt, here's what I need right now. But acknowledging that that's happening, that, you know, think about some of the most embarrassing mistakes you've made in relationships, and how you were feeling at the time that that mistake was being made. How easy would it have been for you in that moment to completely change course and to say, I'm going to move into correction? It wouldn't have been. It's really, really vulnerable to move into a repair attempt. And so when we recognize that's going on, that's a really prime time to assist your partner or assist that other person in being successful in that attempt, because it's a brave thing that they're doing. And when you're on the repairing side of things, thinking of how hard that is to let down your walls when you've been hurt, or let down your walls when you've been misunderstood, that's a prime time to give an assist to your partner in bringing the walls down and becoming vulnerable again. And when that can happen on both sides, that can be an incredibly connecting, impactful moment for a relationship.
I could see that. I could see, when there's that awareness, that this person is, even though it's vulnerable, even though it's difficult, is going like, I'm gonna step out into this. I'm gonna try this,
Mhm.
and even like you said, if it doesn't go particularly well, because it's, it's like anything else, as we're learning stuff, I've told you that we're learning ballroom dance, and I'll tell you, when we first start learning a step, it's we get the little video, we have our instructor video us, and it's really awkward most of the time, but then as we
Yeah.
practice, I go, gosh, we actually get the hang of this, and it's nice to see, the improvement. But yeah, you have to start somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. And that I would say that's a big takeaway from this. You have to start somewhere, and that's the key in repair attempts is to start. To wait until we either don't need them or to wait until we've got it perfect. Um, that's going to prolong hurt and that's going to prolong disconnection. So start somewhere. Start somewhere.
Well, and I liked what you talked about with making it before the actual hurt. Like, if you, can intervene a little earlier before it's like full out hurt,
Yep.
um, uh, and I could see it, like, if I'm feeling hurt, for me to be able to say, I'm feeling a little hurt now, and then have the repair attempt be, oh, I didn't realize, and I mean, even that would be progress,
Yeah. Yeah.
rather than just going back to our separate trenches of like digging in. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Any questions either on
Questions?
repair attempts or anything else?
I can definitely see, how challenging it would be to make, if you're a really, really hurt partner, it would be challenging to accept those repair attempts. Like, I'd have to make a point of going, I'm going to be willing to do this because it's for the betterment of our relationship, even though I'm really angry and hurt right now.
Uh-huh.
So we've got a question. My husband and I are 4 months past D-Day. We're both working hard, seeing CSATs, and have 12-step sponsors. I'm feeling pretty comfortable with his sobriety plan, and I trust his sponsor, but it scares me that his treatment plan isn't dealing with partner abuse. He verbally abused me for years, and a month before D-Day, I finally told him that I would leave if he didn't get help. He started seeing a therapist for the verbal abuse, but then D-Day came and he switched to a CSAT. Since D-Day, he hasn't screamed at me, but he's pivoted to covert emotional abuse, and I'm terrified. So sorry. Um, I'm terrified it's, man. I think that somebody said Mercury retrograde. I'm like, I think this is just how my day is going. So okay, I apologize. Why don't you read the question? I'm on a queue.
Okay.
So,
I
yeah,
got it.
sorry.
I got it. Let's see. He verbally abused me for years, and a month before D-Day, I finally told him that I would leave if he didn't get help. He started seeing a therapist for the verbal abuse, but then D-Day came and he switched to a CSAT. Since D-Day, he hasn't screamed at me, but he's pivoted to covert emotional abuse, and I'm terrified it's getting worse. My therapist says his treatment needs to be focused on sobriety for now, and I want to stay in my lane, but I'm scared that if he doesn't get help focused on abuse, it's going to keep getting worse. I leave the house when he's abusive, but that's not a long-term solution. It also feels really unfair to make his abusive behavior just my problem to deal with rather than his, and I'm tired of walking on eggshells. Amen to the person who put in this question. A couple of things I'm going to put in here. So to me, when you're in a relationship, if there's any kind of sexual addiction, infidelity, that kind of thing going on, it needs to be addressed because that is inherently abusive. I'll often say to my clients, in fact, I said this to a couple earlier this week. When I'm working with an addict who's in a committed relationship, our treatment plan is very different than when I'm working with an addict who's not. Because an addict who's not, if they are, if they're a bear to everyone around them, that has some impacts, but it doesn't have as many impacts as if they are in a marriage, a committed relationship, and they're taking that out on their partner all the time. So addiction is abusive, and the purpose of addressing abuse in a relationship is to get it to stop. So the purpose of addressing addiction in a relationship is to get the abuse to stop. So I would actually, without having assessed more of this, I don't know that it's a simple matter of you've got to stay in your lane and he's got to stay in his, and just the sobriety needs to be focused on. I really look at this as another way of him acting out, and that does need to be addressed. And I think it's a fair request to make, to bring that up, and it may even be one of your bottom lines. I'm not willing for this to continue. I'm not willing to stay in this relationship as it is if this continues. It would be the same way as if, think about it no differently, as if your partner was serially acting out with other people, and they were saying, I really want to quit, I intend to quit, but this is so ingrained, I can't stop acting out with this other person. You wouldn't tolerate that as sobriety or treatment for a second. And so I think when it comes to, abusive dynamics, you don't have to tolerate that in service. We'll get that to that later. You can have boundaries now. You can, I've often, I've often, with the permission of, the therapists of the spouses of the addicts that I work with, I've talked with those spouses specifically and said, can you help me understand any more of your concerns related to the relationship? So I make sure the treatment that we're giving your significant other is, we're not missing things that he may not think is significant or he may be too ashamed to talk about. So I would really encourage some self-advocacy there. Know what your bottom lines are, know how you can get safe and stay safe. And again, I would look at your willingness to readdress that with your therapist and to say, this isn't for me, it's not sobriety or stop abusing me. It's like both of these things need to happen. And oftentimes I think when addicts get into recovery, they do have an insurmountable mountain. They have more issues to deal with than they have bandwidth for. And that's not necessarily, I think, the job of family members to make those issues less as they're dealing with it. I think it's to be really specific about the issues you need them to deal with. So, if he is addicted to porn and sex and acting out and betraying me, and he's abusive to me, and he leaves his clothes on the floor, maybe leaving the clothes on the floor can wait, because that's not a life or death huge emotional thing. But I would say abuse and addiction, they're not, there's not different levels there. One is not permissible in the service of getting a handle on the other one. So I really like where your voice is at on this and your own knowledge. Trust your gut on that. Have some good boundaries and keep advocating for yourself. Yeah, that's a tough situation, but I would say that the abuse is just as critical to address as the addiction. Both are a betrayal of the relationship, and where you're coming from is, stop betraying me, it hurts me. And to me, those are both bottom line things.
So the next question, I've recently tried to do some reaching out attempts, but was met with ignoring and a refusal to acknowledge anything was said, even when I asked if he heard me. After hours of him ignoring me, he will get mad that I was on the phone or watching TV.
That's like I said, repair attempts are a two-party thing. And this is why it's painful when the repair attempt is not acknowledged. To me, I talked about those two reasons why repair attempts may not work, and one of them may be a fear of getting closer. There's definitely distancing going on there. And I think with any good faith efforts we bring to our relationship, those are always a gift. And any gift we give, we have a right to reevaluate whether or not we want to keep giving that gift, because anytime you give a gift, it comes at a cost to you. That's what makes it a gift. And so, I hope in some of that feedback from your partner, you'll look at that and ask, do I want to keep giving in this way? Does that overextend me? Does that hurt me in a way that I can't then attend to myself? There's two authors that have written a lot about disclosure processes and rebuilding trust in couples, Dan Drake and Janice Cottle. And they say that there's a verbal disclosure that most people work towards in some kind of recovery. And then there's a behavioral disclosure that everybody starts day one. And the behavioral disclosure is important to look at too. You know, so if this is what repair attempts are met with, what does that tell me about the person that I'm with, and what do I need to be aware of so that I can remain safe and I can remain sane.
And then there's a comment, thank you, that was helpful. I'll keep advocating for myself and establish healthier bottom lines. So, other comments or questions? It's so challenging with all of this stuff too. It's, you know, when someone, you know, just flat out refuses,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't get it, because I'm like, don't you want to have healthier relationships? Don't you want to have different connections? And so I just, quite frankly, I'm baffled at, you know, why someone would be that adamant about, you know, not connecting. So
I'm not saying this is this person at all, because I don't know their
right, no,
husband at all,
right.
but
This is a conversation.
I've had several clients that I've worked with throughout the years where literally I can see in their nervous systems as we're interacting the points where connection with another human being is unsafe and where it terrifies them. I worked with a man once who, one time he came to session and he was talking about how he went back to the town he grew up in, and someone who was a friend of his brother's recognized him out in public and approached him. And this guy, what he fixated on was, I didn't recognize him. I should have recognized him. I should have recognized him. And as we got into the session, I started understanding more what he was saying, as he was saying that didn't feel safe for me for this guy to surprise me with an intimate connection in my life. I should have recognized him more, and then I could have kept my emotional space, but he kind of snuck up on me. And for some people, that really is what's underlying the sex addiction, is the connection to other people is that terrifying. The vulnerability, the variability, it's that terrifying to them. And again, I'm not saying this is that person's spouse, but there's some people who don't operate on that wavelength because it feels completely unsafe to them, which for someone who's experienced enough safe connection or been able to work on enough safe connection, it doesn't compute, does it?
Right. So this person said, I used to try to be vulnerable when reaching out, but have learned that most of the time reaching out in the most shallow way is iffy.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is what happens in couples over time when repair attempts are not noted or not done, is the connection continues to erode. And the relationship certainly doesn't become any safer or any more connected. And it's sad. It's sad. Like I said, in this webinar, I really want to focus on the very basic things we can do to build stronger relationships. And, you know, if there's food, water, and sunlight for a relationship, this is one of those three, I think. Because being human beings, we are going to hurt each other. We are going to make mistakes in our relationships. And knowing that there's some kind of attempt to repair, to reach out, to fix, that can go a long way in creating some safety. But if that's not happening, it's like we're missing some really basic nutrients.
Other comments or questions? So, you know, I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like, there's so much to relationships, you know, it's like, there's so many dynamics, and it's, you know, I mean, they're so rewarding on so many levels, but like, there's just a lot, you know, there's a lot to pay attention to, and little nuances, you know, things that we can do, you know, differently.
Yeah. And the key for me is not to have a perfect relationship or to learn all the rules. It's to get a good enough one.
Oh, great idea. Yeah.
That's really what we need. And so I think for a lot of folks early in recovery, and a lot of couples early in recovery, getting to a good enough relationship is a huge effort, because usually there's been disrepair for a long time. But long term, you're not looking to learn all of these rules and do it all perfectly. You're just looking to be able to do it well enough.
How can I acknowledge my partner's feelings but not take responsibility for soothing him? I feel like he's using me to soothe himself, like I'm his new acting out partner. That's a great question.
Yeah. I got to apologize for those of you that might be turned off to this kind of talk for a couple reasons. First of all, I live in a house with two small boys, so like potty talk is like all over the place. And also the way to do what you're asking, the way it was explained to me was in bathroom terms. So there's poopers, wipers, and get off the potters.
Ah,
And if you're going to help somebody, you have to know what phase they're in. Otherwise, it gets really, really messy for you. And so I think the acknowledging feelings, that's like helping a pooper. Oh my gosh, that looks so hard. I can't imagine. You look so uncomfortable. Like that's what acknowledging the feeling is. Um, when someone's in the wiping phase, you don't want to be the one doing it for them. You might say, here, try this. That's been helpful. Or it looks like you need more. And you might give some coaching there, but don't get in there yourself. And then the get off the potter, that's great, we're done, let's go live a life together. We don't have to live in the bathroom anymore. So I think identifying the stage of change that your loved one is in can help you choose appropriate responses. If somebody is in the stage of change where they're still recognizing like all of the fallout, and they're recognizing that fallout comes with pain, it may actually be counter to their progress to jump in and alleviate the pain or to soothe, because that pain might be a really good teacher for them. And so working on empathetic responses, like I can see why that would be so frustrating. I can see that you're really angry right now. I can see that you don't know what to do. I don't know what to do either. Sometimes just getting into that space and saying, yeah, I see this looks impossible. I feel that too. End of story. Sometimes that's the most effective help that we can give. So in this, I would diagnose where your partner's at. Are they a pooper, wiper, or get off the potter? And then make sure that your help is such that you don't get dumped on in that process. You don't get wrapped up where you're just going to get dumped on, and it's not going to be helpful for you either. And if you're feeling like you're taking that role of just soothing, this is a really great place to encourage involvement in support groups. Have you been on the latest sex and relationship healing webinar? Do you have a support group? Have you talked to your sponsor? Are you in a 12-step group? Is this something you want to talk to your therapist about? Like those can all be some really effective, like, why don't you try wiping with this type strategies. There's a lot of reasons why I think folks on the betrayal side of this have a hard time being empathetic and being there for their partners. And one of them is because what you just did kicked me in the shins and it hurts a lot. So I don't really feel like I can be there for you. And that's okay. I think that's a very natural response. And that's often something that a lot of folks who struggle with addiction struggle to recognize, is their actions hurt people, or they can, and there's consequences for that. We don't have to make up the consequences. They could be really natural. Like, I don't feel like I can be real close to you because I feel like you take a lot from me. You don't give a lot back. So pointing to some of those other resources, recognizing that you can practice some empathy, and that looks hard. That sucks. I'd be frustrated too. And then that can be the end of it for you. So keep working with those boundaries. Find what works for you, what's comfortable for you. But yeah, no, definitely you are not the only person out there in a position to help your partner with this, and you can point them to some of those other resources.
well, and like you said, and Dr. Robbins says too, it's like, for a while, you guys aren't the best people to be supportive
Mm-hmm.
of each other, and you both getting support. All the resources you mentioned, the 12-step therapist, the sex and relationship healing.com, there's a webinar tonight at, well, we're in one now. There's one tonight at 5 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
and there was a men's group earlier. And I mean, there's just a bunch of things, that are opportunities. So encourage you to each get, support, around that. But I actually do appreciate the bathroom analogies. So
Yeah.
you know exactly what you were saying. So
That's my life.
yeah. So my husband's addiction has cost me a lot financially. We lost our family home because of his irresponsible behavior. We seem to be stuck. He's the only one working and he's a shift worker. I don't know how we can make our marriage grow again without some couple therapy. His job takes up a lot of time and it doesn't help that he met his affair partners in the past. I'm sure he's not acting out anymore, but we cannot grow past decades of his addictive behavior simply because he's better now.
I think that brings up a really, really good point. Oftentimes in the crisis aftermath of discovery and disclosure, we're getting all the healing we can get with what's available now. And oftentimes I'll see couples in this position where we responded to the crisis and maybe there's some kind of stabilization from the crisis, but we're recognizing where we need to go next is not included in where we are now. And sometimes some bigger changes, or we might want to consider some bigger changes to allow the kind of growth that we need. I've worked with many, many couples who they get to the point where life, for all intents and purposes, it was just like it was before addiction and infidelity and betrayal and all of that. And they're saying, we're not happy with this now. And that may not be because it was an awful life before. It may be because we've learned a very different way of living and we take care of ourselves better. So doing less when we know we could do more, we could do better, that doesn't feel good to us anymore. And so, you know, I've had folks who have needed to change jobs in order to make the room they've needed for the recovery in their coupleship. I've seen couples who have had to get creative in how they access help for their marriage. I've worked with a lot of partners who have had to come back to their spouse and say, I really appreciate the work you've been doing and I really appreciate the sobriety you've been gaining. I need something different than that. I need you to step into this relationship space. I need your time. I need your attention. I need to know through your behavior that your commitment is here. And again, that's a scary ask because I think a lot of times partners can worry about needing more, indicating to their spouse that they haven't been giving enough. And I don't know that that's necessarily the case. To me, this really sounds like a case of one of those, like doing the best we can now isn't going to get us to where we need to go. And so we might have to shift our paradigm. And, you know, if you're saying we need, I know we can make this work if we have some couples therapy, you might want to go to your spouse and say, this is a priority for me. Can we talk in real terms about how we make this happen? Even if that means a little bit of like, we're moving a little bit of heaven and earth to make that happen. I think the kind of growth you're talking about comes in a new paradigm, a new context. And it sounds like that's really what you're gunning for there.
I agree. And I think, you know, it's not just about settling for, okay, we're sort of in this space and it's better than it was, but, you know, we're still settling. So, you know, for addicts in active addiction, we seem to be really good at finding the resources for whatever it is we want to do. So prioritizing, and whether it's, you know, weekly couples, there is a couples intensive. I'll just throw that out there, and it's pretty cost effective for a 3-day intensive for the two of you together with Paul Hartman. The next one's November 15th through 17th in Los Angeles. More information is on seekingintegrity.com website. I'm happy to answer questions, but there's also a bunch of free resources. Like I think about, you know, the podcast series. There's a bunch of things that are helpful for relationships, this type of thing. And even if you're working different time frames, these are recorded. So, you know, you can watch them together and, you know, talk about it and go, well, how could we incorporate, you know, Jon's great at giving, you know, do these 4 things, you know, or whatever, but it, you know, like it can be a discussion of like, okay, here's where we are. So how do we get to that next level? You know, that's free, except for, you know, being willing and, you know, taking a little bit of time. You know, so I would encourage you from that standpoint. I think Troy loves, you know, he does his once a month on Wednesday morning. Actually, there's some other good ones. I think Jon's is great for relationships. Like be all end all on the relationship building webinar. So, I mean, the other stuff is addiction and things like that, really good stuff, but really encourage you to keep coming back and look at the previously recorded ones. He's got a whole bunch of them, and they're all useful information. So, but I appreciate that you're going like, this isn't going to work for the long haul, and we want to make it different. So good. Don't just settle. Good. Next comment. I think I've come to a conclusion that when my husband is treating me badly, I think he's projecting how he feels about himself onto me, and then gets me acting out, or to act out how he feels so he can feel better. Like he's working out his control emotions outside of himself because he has no resource internally. Does that sound right?
I don't know, because I don't know the specifics with your husband. However, I do think it's a good skill in general to be able to consider that what we're getting from a person has nothing to do with us and has everything to do with them. That may not be in all cases. I think it's important to have flexibility in thinking. So the ability to listen to somebody's feedback and say, okay, let me take that at face value and see where that fits. That's important. I think it's also important to be able to say, I'm going to assume that this has nothing to do with me, and this is really about what's going on with you. So how does that change how I see this, how I feel when I recognize that you might be projecting, or when I recognize that you might not be equipped to deal with your own emotions, and so you might be dealing with it through me. So regardless of why that's actually happening for your husband, it does sound helpful to me that you can externalize that a little bit, and that you can recognize that for the volume and the intensity of criticism, it may be just as possible this really isn't a you problem, or even a you and him problem. It might be a him problem.
So the next one is, I'm finally learning to tell my partner what I need from him, but so far he can't respond in any way other than either ignoring me or throwing a pity party tantrum to shift the conversation into how he's struggling or how he's a victim. I understand that he has zero coping skills. He's in the pooping stage and can't handle my requests or feelings. How can I respond in a helpful way? I usually feel betrayed and abandoned when this happens, and I tend to just shut down. Is there something I can do to safeguard myself from just shutting down and giving up my voicing my needs?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I see a couple ways, or a couple of avenues you could take with this. So one of them would be a hard and fast boundary that may say something like, until you've been able to demonstrate to me that you're in a space where it's safe for me to be vulnerable, I'm not going to be vulnerable with you. I want to do that down the road, and I want that to be a part of our relationship, but that doesn't seem to be something that you can hold right now without feeling criticized or without feeling like we're in a competition. So I'm going to push pause on that. That could be one way. I think another way of looking at that is preparing yourself for what you need to get from sharing vulnerably with him. I think a lot of times when we're hurt after sharing vulnerably and it doesn't go well, it may be because we had some kind of expectation or some kind of need, not necessarily an unhealthy one, but we wanted help with what we were bringing there, and we didn't get the help. So we felt like we fell on our faces. So when we share vulnerably, we might want to come from a place of some internal strength where it's, I'm not sharing this because of what I'm getting from you. I'm sharing because sharing is helpful for me. So I may be sharing so that I know that I'm working my program, and I don't have to wonder if I've told you clearly how I felt and if something's just wrong with me, or if I can see clearly that you're off. So, sometimes sharing the feeling isn't to get the empathetic response. It's to know that we shared the feeling, and to be able to gauge accurately how responsive or capable our partner is in handling that. And so that kind of takes us from this leaning forward and sharing the vulnerability to this standing erect, standing straight up and down, and sharing the feeling to see what comes back, versus sharing this feeling to see if we're going to be caught. So those would be a couple of suggestions I would encourage in going there. Again, at the end of the day, just like in the thing I answered previously, if there's anything that feels abusive going on in your relationship, you do not have to weather that dynamic. It's not permissible, it's not acceptable, and it's not necessary in any kind of relationship to have any sort of abuse dynamic going on. So if that's how it's feeling, find some safe boundaries, some safe space that you can pull back to, so that you don't have to keep being beat up in that. It's okay if extending your heart comes with some pain for that not being able to be held, but to have your heart taken and spat on and stamped on, like that's not, we don't have to do that in any relationship.
Well, and I was thinking, so obviously it sounds like early recovery, or I guess I'm going, or he's not getting enough to be able to learn to have those coping skills. I mean, it does take time, but I thought, well, I wonder if I shared something like, I know I want to share this with you because like you said, it's good for me to share. And I think you've shared this in a different webinar too. It's like, I know you can't do this yet. This is what I'm looking for you to grow towards. So you may need to take this information to your therapist or your sponsor, or whatever, but I want to put this out there so that we have something that I want you to know that this is what I'm hoping to move towards, on this recovery path. So hopefully it would take it out of the, I'm looking for you to change right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not expecting it to be like by tomorrow, you're going to be able to figure all this out, but I want you to have this on your radar so that you're working towards it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's how I would approach this is when you share it's to put it on the radar.
Yeah. How far into recovery would you recommend the couples weekend? Oh, that's a great question. What skills should we have individually before trying something like that? Honestly, and I'll put a link on, if I can get it quick, on the, because it talks about what the goals are for it. And it's, we've had couples come. So we had a couples weekend last week. No, not this weekend, the weekend before. And it was, we got thank yous, thank you emails from all the couples, including the partners, and it's not easy for sure. But it's definitely something that can help build towards. So the goals, it talks about, rebuilding trust, genuine forgiveness, intimacy, establishing and implementing healthy boundaries, communication skills. And I think those are critical ones, establishing and implementing healthy boundaries and communication skills, learning how to have respectful and productive conflicts, because there's going to be conflict. So we've had people that, like the guys have just completed the Seeking Integrity treatment program. We've had people that have come, that they're finding recovery on their own and just looking to have some ability to grieving losses together. That's a huge one too. Planning for continued recovery and healing. So it depends. And the nice thing is there's only a maximum of 4 couples. So it's tailored, to what's going on within the group dynamics. And I think the couples, actually learn from each other as they're, going through this as well. So if you've got questions about it or you want to see if it's a fit for you, give a call.
What I'm hearing from you, Tanami, is it's not as far into recovery as you might think.
Oh yeah, no, this is like, I mean, if you're so far into recovery that everything you've got it figured out, you probably don't need the couples workshop. This is for where there's like, we don't know how to navigate this. So it's a Friday afternoon to a Sunday afternoon. And it's, very specific, and it's not going to fix everything, but it's sure going to give you some opportunities to navigate that path.
Well, I'm so glad you guys are offering this the way that you do, because I look at this as like some relationship triage.
Yes.
We can get in and we can stabilize some things, and we can hit
Yes.
some really key things really early on. And that's my whole philosophy on relationship recovery, in individual recovery, is the relationship is a living, breathing organism, and it needs stabilization and help too. We can't just wait until people are completely healthy and then they can do a relationship. We get healthy in healthy relationships.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Rob talks about the opposite of addiction is attachment. So we do, his Prodependence book is, not about codependence, and you have to, they have to figure it out on their own, and let them have natural consequences. It's like, okay, you love this person. How can we support you in supporting this whole thing so that they can get healthy? I mean, I think it's. there's a challenging case where, there's somebody that desperately needs help and he just is not, gravitating towards it. And, I think he's going to die, but I thought, his loved ones, he's disconnecting. He won't answer the phone now from any of them. And I thought that's a sad sign. I mean, if he was willing to connect with people, and they could say, we really love you. We want you to get help. We want to help this, that would, I think, give a better outcome. So, I think with the couples, if there's all this tension and, which there is, I'm not saying there shouldn't be, but yes, like you said, it's the triage. It's, there's still work to be done. It's not going to be, oh, we fixed their relationship in a weekend. No, but now you've got, some awarenesses and some paths to move through and a safe place to have these discussions and with other couples that can be reflecting, or going, oh yeah, us too, so I think it's really, you're not the only couple that's struggling with this, and, having that can be really powerful as well.
Yeah.
Other questions, comments? We sure can go through an hour pretty quick, can't we?
I know.
Mm-hmm. You never know where the path is going to lead. So we thank all of you for asking questions and bringing information, because it's always lots more interesting. But again, Jon, I'm always appreciative of the tools you bring. And, conflict is so part of every relationship. I think if you're at all invested in the relationship, there's conflict. If you don't care about the relationship, then, you just kind of ignore, whatever. But
no conflict means no investment.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Because then it's just go whatever, I'll see them at the whatever, once a year and don't have to deal with it. So, yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. See you next week. Bye-bye.